One of the toughest jobs in radio is that of the coordinator, particularly when it involves racing. For many, many years for 2KY and Sky. Paul Langham, as far as I'm concerned, was one of the best. I caught up with Paul to have a chat about his career in racing. Good to catch up with you, Paul. Before we have a chat about your illustrious career behind the panel, what sparked your interest in racing?
I think parents, as a little boy, I was taken to some of the country race meetings in Victoria, places like some of the tracks aren't even going anymore, like Woodend and Kyneton and Yarra Glen and tracks like that. So as a young boy growing up, Dad had a keen interest in going to the races, so that sort of got me interested in racing from an early age.
You graduated from college, became an accountant, but you still had a desire to get involved in racing.
Yes, around the time I was doing, my accounting course, I also was going to a lot of the race meetings in Victoria, and at that stage I met up with a guy called Greg Miles and also Ron Hawkswell. They were the two influences on my career. So at the same time as being an accountant during the week, they created an interest in becoming a race caller, which I eventually did do.
And both of them then became legends in their own right. Greg Miles, I've known Greg for many, many years and had the pleasure to work with him, even though we're in different states. Just one of the greats.
He certainly was. He's accurate, easy to listen to, and just a true professional, that's for sure.
And a good bloke.
A terrific bloke. Yeah, really good bloke.
So in those particular days, Paul, a race caller had to start at the bottom.
Yes.
With picnic races first off the list.
Yeah, it was greyhounds to start with, and then moved on to the picnic races. So I started at the Sale Greyhounds back in 1983. I think about 1984 I called my first Gallops meeting at a place called Dedarang in northeast Victoria, and that's a meeting I still do today. They have once a year meeting there. Yeah.
We go from picnic races to the non-tabs.
Yeah, that's right. I did quite a few non-tab meetings around Victoria. Of course, the race callers are a close group of people, and if they can't do a meeting, they'll have a mate of theirs and they'll ring you up and say, can you fill in? So, yeah, I called it a lot of the different picnic and non-tab meetings around Victoria.
And Paul, prior to your involvement doing picnics and non-tabs, that was the way race callers learnt their trade going way back, starting at the bottom, then becoming superstars.
Yeah, well, you look at blokes like Bill Collins, who called down in Gippsland, and Bill said, he started off at a place called Rosedale in Victoria, calling his first meeting. And blokes that I know, like Greg Miles was telling me he started off with the Greyhounds up at places like Wangaratta, Ron Hawkswell the same, Shepparton Greyhounds. So, yeah, it was the country races and the Greyhounds and the harness were the start-off points for a lot of the callers, and a lot of them were non-tab in those days. So, they could engage who they liked, and they often liked to give a young bloke a go, these clubs.
And they had to paint a picture.
Absolutely. I was fortunate enough to meet Bill Collins a number of times, and one thing that Bill said stuck in my mind. He said, you imagine you're calling for a blind person. You are painting the picture for them, and that's stuck in my mind ever since as a race caller.
And Paul, since its inception, and I'm talking about racing, haven't we been blessed with some of the greats worldwide?
Absolutely. Yep, we've got the best of the best here in Australia, that's for sure.
Who would you say was your favourite race caller?
It's hard to pick a favourite, but I think someone like Greg, who I got to know pretty well, and his number of Melbourne Cups he called, Ronnie Hawkswell in the Greyhounds. Of course, in later years I got to work with the great Paul Ambrosoli with the Greyhounds as well. But really, every caller's different, and every caller does a great job.
I think that's the most important thing you just mentioned there, Paul. They all had their own unique style.
That's a very important part, I think, of race calling, creating a style for yourself, not trying to copy the good points off others, but become yourself. You create a style that you call to. Yeah.
So when did you move from being an accountant going into full-time radio?
Full-time radio I moved to in 1993, and I went to a radio station called Triple SFM in Canberra. They were the racing station at that stage, and they covered all the TAB meetings as well as some of the local meetings at Canberra and Queanbeyan. And that was a great experience. That really put me in good stead. I mean, I had been casual at 3UZ in Melbourne before that. From about 89, but I really wanted to make it a full-time career then, so that 93 was the full-time career in Canberra for 7.5 years.
So when did you start panelling for 2KY then / Sky Racing?
Yes, well, that was after I finished in Canberra. A job opportunity came up in Sydney in late 2000, so I joined the team at 2KY in the Parramatta studios at that stage in November 2000.
So taking in just one particular shift, Paul, how many race meetings would you cover at any one time as far as your shift was concerned?
Oh, gee, anything up to a dozen or more nowadays. When I first started in it, I think I do recall being at 3UZ one night, and they went into a bit of a panic mode because they had to cover 6 meetings one night. But you'd laugh at that now. You'd say, well, that'd be a very quiet night. But yeah, dozen or so meetings wouldn't be outside the norm. Yeah.
On a number of occasions you would have an offsider, so you'd be sharing the workload, then they reduce it to just one person. Just tell us about how difficult it was, because you are listening to all race callers from around Australia.
You do. You have to keep an ear on all those tracks, because there's important information can be handed down the line. If there's a late scratching, especially at your principal meetings, you need to get that to air as soon as you can. So, yeah, you've got to keep an ear on all your meetings coming down the line into your headphones, and you develop almost selective hearing, that you tune out from things you don't need to hear, but you tune into the things you need to hear, pass on the information to listeners.
Working with the great Ian Craig, one of the legends, as we've just been mentioning, race callers, he is certainly one of the legends. Was it more difficult knowing that you're working with a legend like Ian Craig?
I think it was. It kept you on edge. You wanted to make sure, all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. But it was a great experience. I mean, race callers like that taught you a lot as well about race coordinating, and they, you develop the rapport. I think, especially if you work with them a lot, on how each other worked, and it was a great experience. Yeah.
I think that's an important point, knowing exactly what Ian or any of the major race callers wanted. You knew exactly when to cross and when not to cross.
That's the most important. Timing is everything, and in the later years, as the years go on, with time such a critical point now, there's race meetings everywhere. You've got to get that vital information to air as quickly as possible, and then move on to the next race from another venue.
And of course, working on race meetings that involve the Golden Slip with on-casters, all those wonderful Group 1 meetings of the highest standard, must have also been a lot of pressure.
The pressure is on you, but I think that's where you can step up, and at the end of the day, if you feel like you're your own worst critics of radio people, you know if you've done a good job, and if you can walk out of that studio thinking, well, I got everything to air, you're a very happy person.
One of your colleagues I have nothing but the greatest of admiration for, one of the panellists and one of the best in the business, Simon Harrison.
Absolutely, fantastic, Simon. He came to us. We met him when we were at Parramatta, and he expressed an interest. He met one of our other announcers, Russell Veach, and Russell and him were chatting, and he was interested in what Russell was doing as a career. Simon came in, had a look at the setup at 2KY, and before we knew it, he was on there doing tote calls. And then we trained him up as a coordinator, and he's now top of the tree.
And you wouldn't know it, Paul, but the fact that Simon did have a disability.
He works with one arm. It was an accident many years ago, and he lost an arm, and to watch him work is amazing. He does a great job, and to listen to him, you would not know there was any sort of disability. As I said, he's top of the tree. Simon, great coordinator.
Some of the other famous names you've worked with, just a couple in particular from Melbourne, Brian Blackmore, Brian Markovic, a wonderful fellow. I haven't seen Brian for many, many years, but a great man.
Brian Markovic, I still recall he's calling his own horse winning the Victoria Derby, Blue Eagle, many years ago, and he put so much into that call. But yeah, brilliant, especially on the harness racing, Brian. And Brian Blackmore, you mentioned, great character from country Victoria, and he was always fun to work with, Brian. Yeah.
Of course, we've got to include Brian Martin, another one of the best.
Brian Martin, top of the line as well. We moved on from at 3UZ. We moved on from Bert Bryan through John Russell, through Brian Martin, and then Greg Miles. The list goes on, and Australia produces the best in the world of race callers. That is for sure. You
mentioned the winner Blue Eagle in the Victoria Derby. I happened to be hosting on Sky Channel that night in the studio, and it was one of the great calls, and I was so thrilled with the way Brian handled the situation, calling the race, and then winning the race.
It must have been a hard task. I mean, you'd want to watch your own horse the whole way, especially in a race as big as the Derby. But he still called that race as if, every other horse got mentioned. It was just brilliant, yeah.
Well, what are our favourite horses and jockeys?
I think favourite horses. I mean, growing up, probably Paleface Adios was a favourite in Victoria. Popular Arm, horses like that. In the gallops world, Kingston Town probably a favourite. You know, I didn't see Tulloch race, but I know he was compared a lot to Tulloch and Kingston Town. Yeah, great horse.
You've reinvented your career to some extent. You're calling the trials now for Club and Angle. You're also now working on the numbers.
Yes, yeah, the tracker, those numbers that come on the bottom of your screen to give people an idea of where their horse is in the running. I'm being trained up to work that system and hand them out to the drivers as they go out. So yeah, interesting change in career, but yeah, very enjoyable.
Now, Paul, your wife Shirley, apart from being a Balmain girl, so she gets all the ticks from me straight away, her family are also very steeply involved in racing as far as radio is concerned.
Radio especially. Her father was a gentleman called Lyle Richardson, who was a very famous, one of the first DJs in Australia. Him and Alan Toohey were apparently given the tags of Australia's first DJ, so Lyle was involved in music. He was also a very good interviewer. He had a program that 2KY used to broadcast from in at Checkers nightclub, and any personalities visiting Australia, and I'm talking about Abbott and Costello, people like that, you know, Frank Sinatra, they'd all go into Checkers, and Lyle would grab them on the way through the foyer where he had his little radio set up, radio studio, and do interviews. So he did a lot of celebrity interviews over the years. Yeah.
Now, Shirley has a very famous godfather that goes by the name of Trevor White. Jesus Christ Superstar fame.
Ah, you found out about that, have you? Yes, she does. Yes. Trevor's been a family friend, and it's actually her daughter's godfather. But yeah, Trevor White. Yeah, very famous for his role as Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar, and as a family friend. And Shirley has known him since she was, I think, 3 years old. So yeah, goes back a long way.
Now, is there any truth at the wedding? Trevor made the comment that don't go buying wine, just bring plenty of water and I'll turn it into wine.
No, I'm sure I know where that comment came from. It could be a commentator upstairs here who just told you that line. But no, there's no truth in the rumour, but we do laugh about it.
He does handle the truth rather recklessly at times.
He does indeed.
Well, it's been great to catch up with you. Good to see you now back involved, particularly here at Club and Angle, and hopefully we'll see a lot more of each other in coming years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mick.